This is the Men Refined podcast.
Welcome to the Men Refined podcast, where iron sharpens iron and men are challenged to grow in godly character. I'm your host, Rafael Sifontes, and my friend Andy Carter will be joining the podcast for this special series as we dive into one of the most powerful books on spiritual formation ever written, The Spirit of the Disciplines by Dallas Willard. In a culture obsessed with quick fixes and shallow spirituality, Willard calls us back to the deep, time-tested practices that truly transforms a man's soul. Over the next several episodes, we'll unpack key disciplines like solitude, fasting, study, and service, not as legalistic burdens, but as tools for freedom, strength, and Christ-likeness. This is about becoming the kind of man who doesn't just talk about faith, but lives it, practices it, and is shaped by it. Whether you're in a car, at the gym, on your lunch break, or out for a walk, welcome to the brotherhood. Let's grow together as men refined by the disciplines of Jesus. To our listeners in Apple, Spotify, Google, or whatever you tune in from, welcome. If this podcast encourages you, please take a moment to leave a rating or review. It means a lot, and it helps other men discover this community of truth and transformation. Now, let's dive into today's episode. So here we are, Chapter 2, Making Theology of the Disciplines Practical. Dallas Willard begins this chapter with a bold and necessary claim. Theology that stays theoretical is incomplete. He writes, "We are not only saved by grace, we are paralyzed by it." In other words, many Christians are stuck. We've heard that grace means we don't earn God's love, but we've mistakenly concluded that effort itself must be unspiritual. Willard pushes back hard against this. He says that our theology must be something we live, not just believe. What do you think, Andy?
Obviously, we believe that we should be Christ-like, but when we start to wrestle with that, we start to really run into a lot of conundrums, a lot of problems, a lot of questions, a lot of things of what does it really mean and what does it look like. He starts off early on by diving into 1 John 3, 9 through 10, which is no one born of God commits sin, for God's nature abides in him, and he cannot sin because he is born of God. Whoever does not do right is not God, nor he who does not love his brother. And he goes through a few more things in here, and they throw out, do we need to be perfect? What does this look like? What do you mean continue? Then they start to look at the Greek, and is it continuously sin or is it partially sin? And so he really does start to challenge that and going, as we start to look at this, there's a pursuit that we need to have, that we really do need to believe in our hearts that we can really be Christ-like. And so we'll wrestle with that without having necessarily the clarity of an absolute answer, but we can wrestle with that in such a way to go, look, I need to plan to obey Jesus. How can I say I'm not going to plan to obey him? If not, what am I doing following him? So the aim is I'm going to try to follow Jesus and let him work out those details. I believe that I can follow Jesus day by day, daily take up my cross and follow him and be more like him. And so in that is the challenge of that belief that's going to be followed by action.
What does he mean by taking up his cross and following him? Because I think we need to recognize that we have failed to do what Jesus said at times. And if we confess that we make Christianity about believing the right things, but not living it the right way or having the right rhythms in our lives, that will get us in trouble.
Well, it's what we talked about in chapter 1. if we don't have and I like that word, and we're going to explore it more, the right rhythms.
Sure. Yeah.
That is so important. So I love this one little section. He's trying to unpack it a little bit more. He says, look, as a result, we find ourselves caught in the horns of a dilemma. If one day I assure my Christian friends that I intend to quit sinning and arrive at a stage where I can perfectly follow Jesus Christ, they will most likely be scandalized and threatened, or at least very puzzled. Who do you think you are that you're going to say, I'm not going to sin anymore? Sure. What are you really up to?
Yeah.
And then he goes on, he says, and this is what I quoted kind of briefly on that. It's like, how can Jesus be my Lord if I don't even plan to obey him? What would that really differ in substance and outcome from not having him as Lord at all? So my Christian fellowship circle will allow me to not follow him and even not to plan to follow him, but they will not permit me to say it. Yet I must do one or the other. Either I must intend to stop sinning or not intend to stop. There is no third possibility. So somehow in the midst of this, if there's no third possibility, we both know, you're not going to look at me and say, Andy, you're perfect. I'm not going to look at you, Rafael, and say you're perfect. That's very clear. I know that we struggle in areas in our life, and we are working through that. But if we don't have that intentionality, that I am going to follow Jesus, I don't care what you say. I am going to do what he wants me to do, wholly. Otherwise, I've already said I'm reserving certain things. And so the only way to do it, again, let's make reference to what we did before. Only way I can make the catch when the ball is at that time to make that catch, or make the hit when I need to, or make the throw when I need to, is if the rhythm that I develop is going to allow me to have that consistency and heart of doing what Jesus did, so that when the moment came, he was ready to be there.
And this does not happen from one day to another.
No.
Do you think that if theology doesn't change our daily habits, maybe we have an incomplete theology understanding?
So you're kind of getting to what we were talking earlier about, well, on our off record, of the very fact that, what's this chapter about? And it really is about practical theology. Mm-hmm. And he starts a whole section on practical theology. Mm-hmm. And it is about transforming us into Christ-likeness. Transformation into Christ-likeness is part and parcel of what practical theology is all about. We all are theologians, and I wish the church would realize this. You go to church on Sunday, guess what? You have a belief about theology.
Sure.
The theology is theo is God, and the study thereof. And, sure. And we are all theologians.
We're all theologians, yeah.
And we need to understand that, and we need to embrace it. And now start to go, how can I make this pursuit of knowing God practical and impactful on my daily life?
How does, and you can go deep as you will like, or as you're able to, but in a personal note, how does your theology changes or modifies your daily habits at your age right now?
As the old money.
Never said that.
Yeah, you didn't, but implied.
As a wise man.
I think we all should, if our theology does not point us to a God that we can know and experience, then there's probably something wrong with our theology. We have got to, it's our understanding of who God is should transform the way we look at the world, the renewing of our minds. Mm-hmm. It doesn't just happen by accident. Mm-hmm. And it should also transform how we live it out. Mm-hmm. Again, what you even said in the last one about our actions. Sometimes our actions need to precede our heart, and we get it done. I think sometimes we get too caught up and going, well, my heart's not really in on this. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to do this. I don't feel like it today.
Sure, feel.
Yeah. But you know what? If we set aside, and I you and I, we've talked about it. It's not about a list of do's and don'ts. It's not about having to be a certain person. It's becoming that certain person. Mm-hmm. And that's a moment by moment. Mm-hmm. And don't ever think that you've reached and arrived. Mm-hmm. I think that's a problem. It's at times it's been like, oh yeah, I got this. And then it's like, oh, no, I don't. No, I don't. And for me, I've kind of summarized a lot of my pursuit to be with humility and curiosity. I think those two issues have got to be evident. And this is not found in Willard, at least at this point. But if you're humble, you're willing to go, maybe my views on how this all works together isn't right. Maybe I need to be sensitive to what could be going on. And if you're curious, you're going to dig deeper to try to find that. That humility and curiosity allows for God's Spirit to speak to us instead of us to dominate our view of what we think it is. And the Spirit can guide us when we're humble and when we're curious.
Also, the spiritual disciplines are not, do you think that they're just, some people think of it like rules, right? Some people think that disciplines are actually rules that we need to have in our lives so we don't get in trouble. Usually that's how the big evangelical in the Western hemisphere sees what disciplines are supposed to look like. Certain amount of rules that we need to follow to show a certain facade or a certain rationale in front of others. I will go the other way. I think that these quote unquote Asian rituals are actually more of a present day necessity than anything else. Present day necessities. We live in a world of so many distractions. We get so distracted right now that we're not paying attention to what God is trying to tell us because we live in that world of distractions. So maybe, just maybe, we need these quote unquote ancient rituals or rules because they will be our present day necessity for us to rekindle our heart condition towards our God.
We have so many distractions. We have so many other things. I think you hit the nail on the head with the social media to the demands that we have on our schedule. I mean, there are so many. We are expected to perform at a certain level. And I'm not discounting, being there for your kids in their baseball game or their dance or whatever it is.
Don't get me started with that.
No, but it's also a privilege. It's a great opportunity. I love to be able to connect to my kids and all those things, but we can get lost in those things. And I think the disciplines are so much more important and reminded for it. I like how Willard summarizes that practical theology's overall task. And when he tries to answer it and saying that there's two things that should mark the church. And its interaction with God. He says the intent for the church is twofold. The effective proclamation of the Christian gospel to all humanity, making disciples from every nation or ethnic group. That we get that. We're pretty good at communicating the gospel. That's kind of what we've been.
I think we have mastered that.
We have mastered that in the message.
In the message, yeah.
But then we drop it over here. And the development of those disciples' character into the character of Christ himself, teaching them to do all things whatsoever I've commanded you. We put them into our programs. We put them into our, you show up on a Sunday and you listen to a great sermon and it's like, check, the church that we attend, they did a fantastic job going through Genesis 1 through 3 a couple weeks ago. My fear is that people in our church will think, oh, I've now studied Genesis 1 through 3. He just touched the surface of it. They did a great job, but it's just the surface. We've got to learn to dig. We've got to learn to, that whole aspect of building into his character doesn't just happen through our focus on being able to communicate a good gospel message. It communicates in being Christ-like. And so you're right. It comes back to, we have too many things that are distractions. And until we realize that those distractions, we need to somehow make sure they're enhancing us, or not the excuse for us becoming more like Christ.
Yeah.
And that's practical theology.
Yeah. And I think that we should have those boundaries. I think as a Christian is healthy to have boundaries. Once I think as a man you have to be very self-aware of what's going on in your life. And once you find and you resolve on how self-aware you are, you're going to figure it out pretty quickly on what is actually taking over your life and the things that you have to put away and the things that you have to consume and the things that you have to
put on principle you get from Timothy or from Ephesians.
Exactly. And the stuff that you have to guard also. You have to protect. Right? We're called to be protectors. And you have to protect yourself first before you can protect others. You can protect others if you're not ready.
Put the oxygen mask on you first.
Of course.
Before you put it on the neighbor.
Of course.
So what is our plan? And I think this is what we have to wrestle with, and that's what Willard is trying to do. What is your plan for teaching everyone to be followers of Christ, to follow what Christ commanded? And it can't be just an ABC plan, but are we intentionally developing a plan to be more like Christ?
And it could be a 1, 2, 3 plan.
And it could be a 1, 2, 3.
Sure.
Well, especially since we have some things to maybe put on and put off.
Absolutely.
And the world is telling us a different plan.
Oh,
social media, do this, accomplish this. You must live in this type of house.
Nonstop.
It is nonstop. We're bombarded with all these different ideas. And then
we have way too much information.
Way too much. And a lot of it's wrong. And then we have to belong to our tribe. Mm-hmm. Whether it's done on political lines, to neighborhood lines, to school lines, or whatever it is, your tribe sets up certain expectations. And the question should be, are those the same expectations that Jesus would have?
Sure.
Or am I taking theirs?
Not that being part of a tribe is wrong.
No, not at all.
On the contrary, because we're tribal people. Mm-hmm. We're humans. Yep. We're tribalistic by nature.
Yep.
But how do we... It's just what is our place in that tribe? Mm-hmm. We are supposed to be the salt of the world. Mm-hmm. We're supposed to be the light on that hill. Mm-hmm. So who we are on that tribe
is important. It is. We need that. But I think what we're getting to, and Dallas, again, we'll tie back into him. I think he hits the nail on the head, is for us to be able to understand, take a look at ourselves, evaluate where we are. He says here, the American church has overestimated the good that comes from mere scientific progress or doctrinal correctness, or from social progress, missionary work, and evangelism. What we're talking about, we're good in some of these things.
Sure.
The church has been shaken to its foundations by ideological, technological, and military movements on a scale never before experienced by humankind, as it has been smothered by mass culture, mindless prosperity, insipid education, and pseudo-egalitarianism. So the result is that the church has lost any realistic and specific sense on what it means for an individual believer to grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord. And so I think if we can start to put, he identifies some of major catch-alls. And if we can identify how that really does impact me and go, is this really impacting or inhibiting me from becoming more like Jesus?
So it seems that the Western church has put so much emphasis and work and resources to the masses project. We want to get the masses to believe in this God. But we delegated also the spiritual, personal aspect of growing the individual to be fully devoted human being who loves our God and has to do certain things through that love, right? Then we have these specialties or disciplines that we need to grow into so we can connect and have a better life that can follow the lifestyle of Jesus. We've spending too many resources on the masses, but not as many resources to the personal development of the individual on the faith side of things. I think
I would even say, who cares so much about spending the money on the resources? What are you doing with your time? You know, it's funny. Just what you said is, I think, a great truthism, that we have figured out so much and we have put so much into. That it's a free, that salvation is free. It's a gift from God. There's all this other stuff, and yet in the midst of this, we have put up our own pharisaical laws and structures to try to guide and direct what we're supposed to be doing. That we've missed the boat. We just miss it, and it's really unfortunate to see how we have substituted Christ-likeness. With these other outside rules of trying to, you have to come to faith by grace, but now you need to show up to church, you need to go to this study, you need to be involved in this, you need to do all these other things. That's what shows you're a Christian. Sure. As opposed to, I am making very hard Christ decisions in the midst of my life. that omit certain things in my life to be more like him.
Well, Willard in this chapter, he says that he reclaims the idea that theology must lead to transformation through actionable obedience, not just the understanding of that theology, not just the understanding of that theology.
Yeah, just understanding it doesn't. And we have good teaching.
Sure.
Are you living it out? And we forget that there's orthodoxy. We spend so much time on orthodox beliefs. Where's the orthopraxy? And that's the practicing of them. They go hand in hand. And that's practical theology.
Well, and sometimes I think on how we do certain things as members of a church body also, I sometimes see other, I don't know, denominations, maybe will be the wrong word, but other camps of Christianity doing certain things very different, and those, let's call those rituals, actually makes the heart of the men feel a bit closer to God. I'll give you an example just to expand on this. The Western church, Protestant, versus the Catholic Church. You have these beautiful buildings. You heard me say this many times. You have these beautiful buildings, beautiful glass. As you come into these buildings, you feel a sense of an awe by the Creator, a sense of honoring, a sense of respect for the body of believers that are coming together to worship and hear the word of the Lord being preached. Yeah, so we as Protestant, exactly, we have lost the reverence.
The reverence, yep.
Right? The reverence when we come together as a body of Christ.
Yeah.
We wanted to remove everything that may be similar to our Catholic brothers and sisters because we're now Protestant, right?
We have a lack of reverence in that of sacred and holy.
Yes.
And we'll get more into that,
Yes.
I think, as we go on. But
Yes.
But because if you, again, I'm really jumping ahead, and this is not in this chapter at all, but fasting has certain reasons for it. And part of your reasons at times is because of this holy moment. I'm fasting because eating food would be disrespectful. And I think we've lost that sense of wow, this really is a sacred moment. We're selecting a new senior pastor for a church. Well, I know the elders have fasted. Well, why aren't we pushed to fast? Because that is a sacred, right? Corporal. Or we're going through some struggles on some different things. Sometimes we often will fast for God's guidance, but sometimes it's just out of reverence. So I have added a day of fasting as part of my practice that is in there. The Jewish people used to do it 2 times a week. It's to try to remind ourselves to deny certain aspects that I tend to hold on to, that I think is sustenance. And, feasts should be important to us because they celebrate God's abundance. This is to take her and say, I'm going to celebrate God's sufficiency. They're both and. It's not one or the other. And so in the midst of our seeking after him, we have our church is too filled with our technological advances, and you're right, the lack of awe and reverence that we just simply and humbly want to get before God.
We just remove everything.
Yeah,
we remove every little thing that will make us feel in awe as we come into, quote unquote, the building. Yeah. I will say as we come together, right? That reverence has been totally removed in our Protestant churches. Yeah. It's like the flat, the wider, the squares, the better the walls, right? It's like we don't want nothing that could be similar interpreted as we're taking something from the Catholics. Yeah. And I get the idea that the pulpit is at the center, that the preaching of the word is at the center. I get that. I get that that's the most important thing, right? Which our Catholic brothers and sisters do not, right? The pulpit is actually on a corner. Yeah. I get the idea. Well, I get the why, though.
The center, which is just fine. It's just, in other words, we don't need to go that direction.
Sure. But they're not making the word the center of it. That's the main point here, and we want to make sure that that's really very implicit every time we meet as Protestant. That's the biggest thing. But we have removed the awe, the reverence of it. I'm not saying that that's being legalistic or not. I'm not saying that that's a necessity. On the contrary, I just think that there's some things that we need to think about.
Well, I think we need to realize, regardless of the building's demure and how it's set up, is are we able to, in our body, find a challenge so that our faith and our practice will draw us closer to be more like Christ. And you know, some of us, I would prefer almost the monastery aspect. You know, I like the quiet, the simpler. One of the great things about being a missionary and where we were is oftentimes we couldn't even get a microphone and different things. And
you don't need it.
You didn't
need it. The acoustics were just perfect.
They weren't. You had to shout it out. You had to do what you could.
Sure.
But you got a guitar up there, and that was what you sang.
Yeah.
You didn't have any slides. People just started to learn the songs.
Yeah.
You just did what you could do to make it work. And we have become so technologically advanced, and
we have
the
become
mood has got to be
impaired.
just right. And so, but again, I think getting back to Willard on this transformation is about a practical theology that we need to apply and make sure that we are really growing in a healthy relationship with Christ. Regardless of the building, regardless of other things, we really need to take advantage of that time. On Sunday, on time when our small groups, in time with our spouse and with others, that we are growing closer to Him. All these should be tools and steps along the way towards that end.
And I think that these chapters that we've been on so far, I think it's a powerful call for Christian to rise up, not to just believe, but also to train, right? To do what is necessary, so it can compensate our belief and it can demonstrate our belief. The author is not calling us to legalism, but he wants this to be a grace-empowered lifestyle where obedience becomes a joy. As men of faith, I think we're not called just to comfort, but to Christ-likeness, and that's going to require a spiritual discipline. And it's going to look different for every person, but the disciplines are actually very unique, consistently unique in the faith life. We're talking about solitude. We're talking about praying, fasting, reading the word. I mean, there's certain things that can be here and modified and expanded, but they're very unique to the faith Christian life. Okay,
so you started to bring up a little bit of the different denominations of different things and faith practices. He points out that part of the problem is the denominational specifics get so emphasized and so hard pressed that if you don't follow those distinctives, then you're missing something on the midst of it. In our denominations and I think then he actually spends time talking about the more liberal and then the more conservative aspect of the practice of the faith. And each one of those has weaknesses. And I think that if we're willing to, again,
and strengths too.
What's that?
And strength. Some of them have weaknesses and strength.
Okay, yeah. They both have strengths.
Sure.
Without a doubt. Thank you for pointing that out. They have their strengths and they have their weaknesses. And I think if we don't understand some of those things, then we're going to be misplaced in our own pursuit. And so he's actually building some of this up too, pointing out how the spiritual disciplines were almost ignored for many years. Was, in fact, Christianity today had even called it as part of their ancient practices. Part of the history.
Ancient ritual.
Yeah, ancient rituals.
They were rituals, right?
Exactly.
People didn't want nothing to do with it.
They wanted nothing to do with them. I think because we've abused them and we've overemphasized them.
Something happened along the way.
Something we tend to do that, don't we?
We needed to go back.
Yeah, and we need to go back.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, and then we have our own in our Protestant denominations anyway.
Sure.
What about your quiet time?
Sure.
You know, are you memorizing the right verses?
I know.
All these, we have these specific other things that we have tried to put in there, which are good.
Yes.
I'm not saying any of this is not good. We got to do these things.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's in a context. I mean, I think one of the things I learned early on is that even the Catholic Church, I brought up in the Methodist Church, a stronger liturgy than what we have.
Love that.
Right now.
I appreciate the liturgy.
I did not. I didn't see a vital, alive, vibrant church.
I appreciate it now.
And I've grown to appreciate it. I'm with you.
And we can definitely talk about liturgy later on, but now that I'm a bit older, I appreciate liturgy.
Well, there's others
more
who have been in liturgy their whole lives who are appreciating less liturgy. There's always a liturgical process, even in our church that is an EV free, that is not as liturgical high church. It's a low church. We have our songs that we sing. Sometimes there's a set number, and then you have the message or messages of what's going on, and then you have the message coming out, and then you have another song at the end, and then you might get a benediction.
Sure,
it's a liturgy, but we
just don't know what's coming each Sunday.
Exactly.
Right?
It's going to be a little bit different. We don't know if it's 3 songs, 5 songs.
Yeah.
We don't know.
We're guessing every Sunday. It's like, okay, let me see what's the flow look like today.
And it should be. I appreciate it when we do alter it a little. I appreciate when we have our Sunday of extra prayer.
Sure.
Something like that. But that's a topic for another conversation for another day. But all this is that Dallas is pointing out, look, be aware of your denomination's weaknesses. Be aware that of how it might deny the power of Christ and his functional authority over how we do draw close to him.
What do you think it will be a good application for men out there from this chapter? How will that look like? I was thinking more of when we were talking about our rhythms, right? How do we replace I would say probably our hustle culture with more of holy rhythms? But we could expand on what holy rhythms will mean, right? What's a holy rhythm? What do you mean by that? I will say, well, how's your prayer like? How's your prayer life look like? I will definitely ask that question. How much time do you spend with God alone? How much time do you spend reading the Word, right? How much time do you spend in community with people that can build you up? How much time do you spend with other men or women who can actually build you up and provide good wisdom that only comes from God? I think those are good holy rhythms that it will be a good application for Christians today. What would you say will be another?
Well, you've kind of answered the question.
Everything? You got nothing.
I always have something.
You have something.
But I'm trying to bring Dallas into the something.
Yeah.
We can have a really high view of the Bible. We can hold to that. But are we functionally finding truths from the Bible that are going to transform us? Again, it comes back to that transformation. It comes back from that practical theology. And I think there's too much. I mean, you brought out specifically men. I think that we have an obsession at times of separating men and women. Both of us are trying to be more like Christ-like, and we need to. And I think a lot of and I can't say anything about the women books that are out there because I've not read any, but a lot of the men books focus on certain manliness and certain, you got to be a man's man and things like that. So actually where I do appreciate Eldridge is his approach is a little different. I'm being wild at heart. He points out certain characteristics about us, but he really is pointing us back to be more like Christ. And I think the same thing is what Willard is trying to do is that, you know what, if we start to apply these things, you're going to be the man of God that God wants you to be.
Sure.
If you really start to find the rhythms of the feasts, the fasting, the disciplines, and you start to really prepare yourself for that moment when it comes up, you're going to be ready. Much more so than if I become the man who applies these 10 characteristics, and I'm this person and that person. That's putting the cart before the horse. What we need to be really doing is making sure that we really are intimately seeking after God.
Yeah.
It's not as complicated, I think, as we want to make it.
Well, what is complicated is carving the time, and I think that's the biggest
it's changing
issue.
Our lifestyle.
That's the biggest issue for men right now. And you say, well, all these books that are coming out about men, and they look exactly like this, and the themes are kind of like similar altogether. And I think of like, well, there's got to be a reason that now, 15, 20 years now, in Christianity, in the faith, now we are actually writing books about how men are supposed to do certain things. What happened before that? Why do we need to get there? What has happened to really Christian men that now there's a huge interest and there's a huge library coming up of resources for us to tell us how to do certain things? Something happened along the way.
Well, I think we finally realized how empty and meaningless our lives can be when we sign up for a set of creeds without wanting to experience who's the creed giver, and we show up to church, check off the right boxes, but we're not seeing transformation. And it is about a right belief, not just a belief that is that you can state the doctrinal creeds correctly, but it's one that really starts to reflect in the reality of your life and my life, we can more effectively impact this world or live in this world that shows Christ likeness, and it will cost us something. And until we're willing to say, you know what, this way hasn't really worked, I need to change something, and look at our own life, then we're going to be stuck in the same murk and mire that we've been in, and that's just not good, not healthy. And I think we've got to be able to wrestle with those things, and that's what Willard is pointing out. There's a problem. We need to look at it. We need to analyze it and figure out how
to do something about it. We need to practice it, though.
How does our practical theology impact our life today? What's really going on in the midst of it?
I think in closing, that's a good segue into explaining that not just the theology that we consume or the books that we read, how is it going to help us mentally, spiritually, physically? What's going to come out of that? What's going to come out of our bodies, out of our souls, out of our spirit? Like, how are we going to represent what we're consuming? And I think that as human beings, we represent what we consume. So the more we consume about the Bible, about certain disciplines, the more we do these things, I think we're going to be a representation of what really being salt and light in this world
is really going to be about.
Will really look like.
Yeah. So let me close again reading from Dallas Willard. He actually, here towards the end of this chapter, he quotes Foster, who we mentioned last time, in his celebration of disciplines. And he said, full participation in the life of God's kingdom and in the vivid companionship of Christ comes to us only through appropriate exercise in the disciplines for life in the Spirit. And then Willard adds this: those disciplines alone can become for average Christians the conditions upon which the spiritual life is made indubitably real. It's true. And if this point can be made as convincingly as its truth and its importance deserves, the practical effects will be stunning. There will be a life-giving revolution in our personal lives and in our world.
Amen. Thanks for joining me today on the Men Refined podcast. I hope this conversation encouraged you, challenged you, and helped you take one step closer to becoming the man God created you to be. If you find value in today's episode, will you take a moment and leave a rating and a review? It will help more people and more men find this podcast. It will help the algorithm, whatever it's called now these days, and join us in this journey of spiritual growth and godly leadership. You can follow and share the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you listen to your podcast. And be sure to connect with me on social media, especially on Twitter at twitter.com/Rafael Sifontes. Links on the bio, on the description of this podcast, or X, right? .com/Rafael Sifontes. Until next time, stay grounded in the word, bold in your faith, and refined in Christ. Blessings.